In 2021, when Michael Carrick quietly stepped away from Manchester United after serving as caretaker manager, Cristiano Ronaldo posted a message that many fans scrolled past without much thought: "Nothing is impossible for this guy." At the time, it felt like a simple gesture of respect. Ronaldo had just returned to Old Trafford. Carrick had steadied the ship after Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's departure. It seemed like a polite farewell between professionals who shared the same dressing room. But football has a strange way of turning small moments into powerful symbols. 5 years later, after tactical confusion, inconsistency, and a season spiraling under Ruben Amorim's 3-4-3 experiment, that message feels less like courtesy and more like prophecy. This is the story of a timeline where Carrick returns, not as a nostalgic figure from the past, but as the calm architect United desperately needed. The 2025-26 season began with optimism. Ruben Amorim arrived with a strong reputation for structured, aggressive football. His 3-4-3 system had worked wonders elsewhere. The promise was clear: modern pressing, wing-backs flying forward, vertical transitions, and tactical bravery. United fans were told this was the evolution the club required. But football is never about copy-and-paste systems. It is about context, players, psychology, and balance. From the first few months, cracks began to show. The 3-4-3 left United's midfield exposed. The spacing between the back three and central midfield became a tactical nightmare. Opponents quickly learned to overload the half spaces. Transitions turned chaotic. Instead of controlled aggression, there was confusion. Instead of dominance, there was vulnerability. The wingbacks were caught between attacking ambition and defensive responsibility. When they pushed high, United were countered ruthlessly. When they stayed deep, the attack lacked width and unpredictability. The pressing triggers weren't synchronized. One forward would press, the others would hesitate. The back line would hold shape, unsure whether to step or drop. It was a team unsure of itself. Young players suffered the most. Dorgu, signed for his dynamism and fearless runs, looked lost in positional uncertainty. He was either too advanced without support or too deep to influence the attack. Benjamin Sesko, brought in as a long-term number 9 solution, struggled to adapt to isolation up front. In Amorim's structure, the central striker often had to occupy 2 centre-backs alone while wingers tucked inside. Without precise supply lines, Sesko became disconnected. Confidence drained. Old Trafford grew restless. The headlines turned harsh. Tactical diagrams flooded social media, highlighting the gaps in midfield and defensive transitions. Critics questioned whether United's squad was built for such a system. More importantly, fans began asking a dangerous question: was this philosophy forcing players into roles that didn't suit them? By winter, the season was hanging by a thread. European qualification looked uncertain. The dressing room felt heavy. And that was when the conversation started, quietly at first, about Michael Carrick. Carrick had been building his coaching identity away from the spotlight. He had gained experience, refined his philosophy, and earned respect for his calm authority. Those who worked with him described him as meticulous, tactically intelligent, and emotionally balanced. He was not loud. He did not dominate press conferences. But inside training sessions, he was precise. When the board made the bold decision to part ways with Amorim and bring Carrick back mid-season, it wasn't about nostalgia. It was about stability. Carrick's first press conference was understated. No grand promises. No revolutionary declarations. He spoke about clarity, structure, and giving players confidence. Football doesn't have to be complicated, he said. It has to make sense. The first major change was subtle but transformative. He moved away from the rigid 3-4-3 and implemented a flexible 4-2-3-1 that could morph into a 4-3-3 in possession. It wasn't about abandoning modern principles. It was about balance. The back four immediately looked more comfortable. Fullbacks had defined responsibilities. One could advance while the other tucked in. The double pivot provided protection and progression. The distances between lines shortened. Suddenly, United weren't stretched across the pitch. They were connected. Dorgu became one of the biggest beneficiaries. In Carrick's system, he was allowed to attack with freedom but within structure. With a clear fullback behind him and midfield support inside, his explosive runs became purposeful instead of desperate. His confidence returned. He began taking on defenders, delivering early crosses, cutting inside when space opened. Fans started seeing the player they were promised. Sesko's transformation was even more dramatic. Carrick focused on building patterns that involved the striker more consistently. Instead of leaving him isolated, the number 10 operated closer, creating triangles in central areas. Wingers timed their runs beyond him rather than drifting too narrow. Sesko started receiving the ball in dangerous pockets. His hold-up play improved because he had options. His finishing sharpened because he wasn't feeding on scraps. Defensively, Carrick emphasized compactness. The pressing became coordinated. Triggers were clear. When the ball moved wide, the nearest midfielder shifted immediately. The back line stepped together. There were fewer gaps, fewer chaotic sprints toward their own goal. United didn't just run more, they ran smarter. The psychological shift was just as important as the tactical one. Carrick understood the weight of Old Trafford. He had lived it as a player. He knew that fear spreads quickly in that stadium when performances dip. So he simplified instructions. He reminded players of their strengths instead of overloading them with complexity. Results followed. A narrow away win against a top-6 rival signaled change. A dominant home performance, with fluid attacking movements and disciplined defending, reignited belief. Clean sheets started appearing. Sesko scored in consecutive matches. Dorgu provided assists. The midfield looked composed rather than panicked. Pundits began analyzing the turnaround. Some called it back-to-basics football. Others praised Carrick's adaptability. What stood out was not revolutionary tactics, but coherence. Every player seemed to understand his role. Transitions were controlled. The team moved as a unit. By spring, United were climbing the table. European qualification, once a distant dream, became realistic. The dressing room energy shifted from frustration to hunger. Interviews with players hinted at renewed trust in the process. There was less talk of systems, and more talk of togetherness. And that's when Ronaldo's old message resurfaced. Clips of his 2021 post began circulating online. Nothing is impossible for this guy. Fans who once dismissed it started sharing it as evidence of foresight. Ronaldo had trained under countless managers, Ferguson, Mourinho, Ancelotti, Zidane. He understood leadership when he saw it. Perhaps he recognized in Carrick something that wasn't obvious to the public: composure under pressure. Ronaldo's words gained symbolic power not because Carrick was performing miracles, but because he was restoring identity. United under Carrick didn't look confused. They looked intentional. Critics argued that the squad itself had matured, that new signings needed time, that mid-season adjustments are easier than long-term projects. And there was truth in that. Football is never about one man alone. But Carrick's influence was undeniable in how quickly instability turned into structure. The tactical disaster under Amorim wasn't about bad ideas. It was about misalignment. Carrick's success wasn't about outdated conservatism. It was about fitting strategy to personnel. He didn't force players into a system, he built a system around players. By the final weeks of the season, Old Trafford felt alive again. The pressing was sharp. The passing triangles were crisp. The defensive line held firm. Sesko reached double digits in goals after a slow start. Dorgu became one of the league's most exciting wide threats. Young academy players integrated smoothly because expectations were clear. Carrick never claimed he was saving the club. He spoke consistently about collective effort. But the narrative wrote itself. From caretaker in 2021 to long-term solution in 2026, his journey mirrored the club's need for stability in chaos. The bigger question remains, was Ronaldo right all along? Perhaps he wasn't predicting a dramatic return. Perhaps he simply recognized character. In elite football, tactics matter enormously. But personality, calmness, and trust matter just as much. Carrick's quiet authority contrasted sharply with the turbulence of failed experiments. He didn't need grand speeches. He needed clarity. In this alternate timeline, United's revival wasn't a fairy tale. It was incremental. It was about small improvements stacking over weeks. It was about redefining roles, reinforcing fundamentals, and rebuilding belief. The miracle wasn't flashy. It was disciplined. As the season closed with United securing European football and momentum heading into the next campaign, the atmosphere around Carrick shifted from temporary fix to long-term architect. Fans began imagining what a full pre-season under his guidance could achieve. Recruitment aligned with tactical identity. The board spoke of stability rather than reinvention. 5 years after that overlooked social media message, it stands as a reminder of how quickly perceptions change in football. Words that once seemed polite can become prophetic. Managers dismissed as transitional can become transformational. Nothing is impossible for this guy. Maybe it wasn't prophecy. Maybe it was insight. And maybe, just maybe, Manchester United finally listened.